Marcus Chen had always been different, though he never understood why, until the day the stars began to sing. At 17, he was just another student at the Mars Colonial Academy, dreaming of becoming a xenobiologist like his mother. His days were filled with homework about alien ecosystems, weekend trips to the crystal caves beneath New Shanghai, and the usual teenage worries about fitting in. The singing started on a Tuesday during Professor Martinez's lecture on extinct Earth species. At first, Marcus thought it was tinnitus, a high-pitched whine in his ears, but as the sound grew clearer, he realized it wasn't coming from inside his head at all. The melody drifted down from the crimson sky above, haunting and ancient, like whale songs mixed with solar wind. Nobody else seemed to hear it. Marcus raised his hand tentatively. "Professor, do you hear that sound outside?" Professor Martinez paused her holographic display of a Terran tiger and listened. The classroom fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems. "I don't hear anything unusual, Marcus. Are you feeling all right?" The other students snickered. Marcus felt his cheeks burn as he mumbled an apology and sank lower in his seat. But the singing continued, growing stronger and more insistent. It seemed to be calling to him, pulling at something deep in his chest that he didn't know existed. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The melody had become a symphony, layered with harmonies that made his bones vibrate, and his dreams fill with images of vast creatures soaring through space itself. He found himself drawn to his window, staring up at the alien constellations that had become familiar over his childhood on Mars. Something was coming. The next morning brought chaos to the Mars colony. Long-range sensors had detected massive objects approaching the solar system, moving at speeds that defied known physics. The colonial government went into emergency session, while military ships launched from orbital platforms around Earth and Jupiter. Humanity's first contact protocols activated for the third time in 50 years. Though the previous two encounters had been with microbes and primitive plant-like entities. This was different. The approaching objects were clearly artificial, impossibly large, and accompanied by energy signatures that made no sense according to human science. Marcus sat in his dorm room, listening to the emergency broadcasts, while the singing in his head grew so intense he could barely think. His roommate Jake paced nervously, checking his tablet every few seconds for updates from the defense fleet. "They say these things are the size of continents," Jake said, his voice tight with fear. "Moving faster than light somehow. What if they're hostile?" Marcus wanted to tell him they weren't hostile, that the singing carried no malice, only profound loneliness, and something like hope. But how could he explain what he didn't understand himself? The first visual contact came when the objects were still 3 days out from Mars. The images transmitted back to the colony left everyone speechless. They weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were alive, dragons. Impossibly vast dragons swimming through the vacuum of space, their scales gleaming with inner fire, their wings spanning distances measured in kilometers. Ancient beyond measure. They moved with the grace of creatures born among the stars themselves. 12 of them approached in formation, their path aimed directly at Mars. The colonial defense grid powered up, but the weapons seemed pathetic against such majestic beings. Marcus watched the news feeds with growing certainty that humanity was about to encounter something that would change everything forever. The dragons arrived on a Friday. They settled into orbit around Mars with careful precision, their massive forms blotting out sections of sky. Each dragon was unique. One burned with the blue-white fire of young stars, another gleamed like polished obsidian shot through with veins of gold. A third seemed to be made of crystallized time itself, shifting between past and future with each breath. No weapons fired. No demands were broadcast. The dragons simply waited, their ancient eyes turned toward the small red planet below. Marcus felt the pull stronger than ever. During the mandatory evacuation drill that evening, as students crowded into emergency shelters, he slipped away from his group and made his way to the observation deck on the Academy's highest tower. The dome overhead provided an unobstructed view of the alien visitors. He pressed his palm against the transparent aluminum and whispered, I can hear you. The response nearly knocked him unconscious. 12 voices spoke directly into his mind, carrying the weight of eons and the wisdom of creatures who had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies. They spoke in harmonies that transcended language, downloading concepts and memories that his young human brain could barely process. They had been searching for someone like him for over 1,000,000 years. Long ago, before humans had even discovered fire, a cosmic catastrophe had scattered the dragon race across the universe. Ancient enemies had found ways to bind and control their kind, turning noble star swimmers into weapons of destruction. Most dragons had been enslaved or killed, their life force harvested to power dark technologies. These 12 were the last free dragons in existence, and they had been fleeing their hunters for millennia. They had crossed galactic clusters and dimensional barriers, always one step ahead of the forces that sought to chain them. In their desperation, they had followed ancient prophecies to this small corner of space, drawn by legends of a young species that possessed something unique, something their enemies could never replicate or steal: human potential. The ability to grow beyond any predetermined limits. The dragons had come seeking not a master in the traditional sense, but a partner, someone who could learn their ancient arts, speak their language, and help them find a way to free their enslaved brothers and sisters. They needed someone young enough to adapt, old enough to understand responsibility, and human enough to think in ways that had never occurred to their ancient minds. Marcus staggered under the weight of their hope and desperation. His knees buckled as images flooded his consciousness. Vast star forges where enslaved dragons powered the weapons of their captors. Prison worlds, where noble beings lay chained in quantum fields. The approaching darkness of an empire that consumed entire species for fuel. "Why me?" he managed to whisper. The answer came not in words but in a cascade of understanding. Every human possessed the spark they sought, but few could hear their song without training that took decades to complete. Marcus was different. His mind naturally resonated with the frequencies of space and time that dragons use to navigate between stars. He was what their ancient texts called a bridge soul, someone who could connect two very different forms of consciousness. But the choice was his alone. They would not force or coerce. If he refused, they would continue their flight through the cosmos, searching for another who might help them. If he accepted, his life as a normal human teenager would end forever. Marcus thought of his friends in the emergency shelters below, of his parents back on Earth, who thought he was safely pursuing an education in alien biology, of the simple life he had always planned for himself. Then he thought of the pain in the dragon's ancient voices, the desperation of beings who had wandered the universe for longer than his entire species had existed. The singing in his head had never been about him. It had been about them, 12 lonely survivors calling across the void for someone who could hear their need. Thanks for watching. And the next one. Thank you for watching. The next one, then comment. The next one, Panet head process. What do I need to do? He asked. The largest dragon, whose scales held the deep purple of nebulae at the edge of reality, began to descend toward the planet's surface. As it approached, Marcus could see that its eyes held starlight and the wisdom of ages, but also something surprisingly familiar. The same uncertainty that any creature felt when taking a leap of faith. The emergency alarms across the colony began to wail as military forces scrambled to intercept what they saw as an incoming attack. Marcus realized he had perhaps minutes before the situation escalated into violence that could destroy everything. He pressed both palms against the dome and reached out with his mind, pushing his thoughts toward the approaching dragon with desperate intensity. What emerged surprised him. Not words, but pure intention, clear as crystal. I'm coming up to meet you. Please don't let them hurt you. The dragon paused in its descent, hanging motionless in the thin Martian atmosphere. Around the colony, weapons systems tracked its position, while military commanders demanded orders from Earth. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Marcus ran for the emergency airlocks, grabbing an environmental suit on his way. His hands shook as he sealed the helmet and activated the life support systems. He had never done a solo spacewalk before, but somehow he knew the dragon would keep him safe. The outer airlock cycled open, and Marcus stepped into the void between worlds. The dragon's claw was gentle as it lifted Marcus from the colony's surface, each scale larger than his entire body, yet somehow warm through the environmental suit. As they rose through the thin atmosphere, Marcus felt his perception shift in ways that made his stomach lurch. Colors he had no names for bled across his vision, and space itself seemed to bend around the dragon's presence. "Fear not, young bridge soul." The voice resonated directly in his mind, carrying overtones of stellar wind and the deep patience of geological time. "I am Vorthak, 9 stars ascending, and I have waited 3 human lifetimes for this moment." The surface of Mars fell away beneath them as Vorthak carried Marcus toward the waiting constellation of dragons. Each being was even more magnificent up close, their scales reflecting not just light but something deeper, the fundamental forces that held reality together. Marcus felt like an ant being carried into a council of gods. As they approached the largest group, Marcus began to understand that what he had mistaken for random positioning was actually an intricate formation. The dragons formed a living mandala in space, their bodies creating geometric patterns that resonated with harmonics beyond human hearing. They were performing some kind of ritual, and his arrival was the final component they had been waiting for. "The joining requires willing participation," Vorthak explained as they settled into position at the center of the formation. "I will share with you the memories of our people, the knowledge of our arts, and the burden of our purpose. In return, your human mind will provide us with new ways of thinking, new possibilities we have never considered. Together, we may find what neither could discover alone." Marcus floated in the space between Vorthak's claws, suddenly feeling very young and very small. Through his helmet's display, he could see military ships from the Mars defense grid approaching rapidly, their weapons charging for what they clearly believed would be a rescue mission. "They're going to attack," he said urgently. "My people don't understand. They think you've kidnapped me." Vorthak's massive head turned to regard the approaching vessels, and for a moment Marcus felt a flash of the dragon's true power. The casual ability to unmake matter at the molecular level, to fold space like origami, to command forces that human science was only beginning to discover. But instead of anger or contempt, he sensed only sadness. "We have encountered this pattern before," Vorthak said. "Fear drives action. Action breeds conflict. Conflict destroys possibility. Your species is young, but not unique in this failing." The other dragons began to sing, their voices weaving together into harmonies that made reality itself vibrate. Marcus felt the song in his bones, in his thoughts, in the spaces between heartbeats, and suddenly he understood what they were doing. They were preparing to leave. "No, wait." Marcus struggled against his environmental suit, trying to reach toward the approaching human ships. "Let me talk to them. I can make them understand." But it was too late. The lead military vessel had achieved weapons lock and fired a warning shot across Vorthak's position. The plasma bolt passed harmlessly through space where the dragon had been a moment before, but the message was clear. Marcus felt Vorthak's sorrow like a physical weight as the great being began to withdraw from the planet's gravity well. "We cannot risk conflict with your people, young one. Too much depends on our survival, and too many have already died for our cause." "Then take me with you," Marcus said before he could think about what he was asking. "I volunteer. Teach me what you need to teach me out there, and we'll come back when I'm ready to help them understand." The dragon's surprise rippled through their mental connection like warm honey. "You would leave your world, your people, your entire life behind?" Marcus looked down at Mars, rotating slowly beneath them, at the tiny lights of the colony where his friends were probably in lockdown, wondering if he was alive or dead. He thought about his parents on Earth, about his planned future as a xenobiologist, about all the normal human experiences he would be giving up. Then he thought about the enslaved dragons laboring in cosmic forges, about an empire that treated sentient beings as fuel for their machines, about the loneliness in these ancient voices as they wandered between stars. "Yes," he said simply, "if it means we can save the others." The military ships were closing fast now, their formations spreading to surround what they perceived as a threat. Marcus could hear radio chatter through his suit's communication system as the commanders tried to determine if he was a hostage or a collaborator. Vorthak made the decision for all of them. With a movement too fast for human perception, the dragon's wings swept in a wide arc, gathering the other 11 beings into a tight formation. Space around them began to ripple and fold as they prepared to enter what Marcus would later learn was called the Deep Current, the hidden dimension where dragons could swim between distant stars. "Hold tight to your thoughts, Bridge Soul," Vorthak warned. "The journey requires your consciousness to remain flexible." The last thing Marcus saw before reality dissolved around them was the Mars colony growing smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light in the cosmic dark. Then, the stars began to move. The deep current was unlike anything in human experience. Marcus found himself swimming through liquid light, while colors that had no names painted themselves across his awareness. Time moved differently here. He could feel minutes stretching into hours, then compressing back into heartbeats. The dragons moved through this space like they had been born to it, their massive forms cutting through dimensional barriers as easily as fish through water. But for Marcus, the journey was transformative in ways he hadn't expected. As they traveled, Vorthak began the process of sharing the dragon memories, and human consciousness proved to be more adaptable than anyone had anticipated. Images flooded Marcus's mind. The birth of the dragon race, in the heart of a dying star. Their first flights between worlds, when the universe was young, the golden age when they served as guardians and guides to dozens of developing civilizations. He saw through ancient eyes as dragon wisdom helped species take their first steps into space, as dragonfire forged the tools that built interstellar empires, as dragon song taught alien minds to hear the music of creation itself. Then came the darkness. A species called the Nethys had discovered ways to bind dragon essence into crystalline matrices, turning the magnificent beings into living power sources for their war machines. What had begun as voluntary cooperation became slavery as the Nethys developed neural control collars and quantum containment fields. The Dragon Wars had raged across 17 galaxies and lasted for what humans would measure as 10 million years. Most of the dragon race had been captured or killed, their life force drained to power Nethys expansion across the universe. Only these 12 had escaped, carrying with them the desperate hope that somewhere in the cosmos they might find allies powerful enough to help them break the chains that bound their people. As the memories settled into Marcus's expanding consciousness, he began to understand why human minds were so important to the dragon's cause. Every other species they had encountered thought in patterns similar to their own, ancient, powerful, but ultimately predictable. The Nethys had learned to anticipate and counter those thought patterns over millions of years of war. But humans were different. Young, chaotic, unpredictable. Human minds made connections that no other species would consider, found solutions in places where logic said none should exist. Where dragon wisdom flowed like deep rivers, human creativity sparked like lightning across storm clouds. The combination of the two types of consciousness created something unprecedented. A hybrid intellect that could think in ways the Nethys had never encountered and could never fully predict. Marcus felt the change beginning in his own mind as the dragon memories integrated with his human experiences. Mathematical concepts that had been impossible became clear. The fundamental forces that governed reality revealed themselves as simple patterns that could be manipulated with the right knowledge. Most importantly, he began to see the weaknesses in Nethys technology that centuries of dragon analysis had missed. Their control systems relied on the assumption that dragon consciousness would always follow certain predictable paths. But what if those paths could be consciously altered? What if a dragon bound in Nethys chains could learn to think like a human? Chaotic, unpredictable, capable of actions that made no logical sense. "You see it," Vorthak said, with growing excitement, as they emerged from the deep current, near a binary star system. Your mind finds possibilities we never considered. Marcus nodded, though the gesture felt strange in the weightless space between dimensions. We need to test the theory. Find one of the prison worlds, and see if we can break someone free. The other dragons had been listening to their mental conversation. And now, they drew closer in space, their formation tightening with shared purpose. Marcus felt their hope like a warm glow in his chest, but also their fear. They had been running for so long that the idea of fighting back seemed almost impossible. The nearest Nethys stronghold is 7 jumps from here, said another dragon whose scales shifted between silver and gold like liquid metal. It holds approximately 300 of our people in quantum bondage. Marcus felt his human mind recoil at the numbers. 300 sentient beings, reduced to living batteries. Their consciousness suppressed, while their life force powered the machinery of an empire. The scope of the crime was almost beyond comprehension. Then that's where we start, he said, surprised by the steel in his own voice. But first, you need to teach me how to fight like a dragon. What followed was the strangest education any human had ever received. As they traveled between star systems, the 12 dragons taught Marcus to perceive reality as they did. Not as fixed laws, the 12 dragons, end quote, but as malleable patterns that could be reshaped by will and knowledge. He learned to see the quantum threads that connected all matter, to hear the harmonics that held atomic structures together, to feel the currents of force that flowed between galaxies. His human brain adapted to the training in ways that amazed his teachers. Where they had spent millennia learning to manipulate cosmic forces through careful study and practice, Marcus absorbed the knowledge in weeks, his neural plasticity allowing him to integrate dragon wisdom with human intuition at unprecedented speed. But the real breakthrough came when Marcus suggested they approach dragon magic differently. Instead of the flowing, musical techniques the dragons had always used, he experimented with sharp, discordant methods that felt wrong to his teachers but produced unexpected results. He learned to summon fire that burned cold, to bend space in directions that didn't exist, to sing harmony lines that created chaos instead of order. Where traditional dragon magic worked by flowing with natural forces, Marcus's hybrid techniques created controlled disruptions that could shatter the quantum locks the Nethys used to bind their prisoners. As they approached the first Nethys stronghold, Marcus felt ready for what was to come. His environmental suit had been replaced by a living symbiotic shell that one of the dragons had grown for him, allowing him to survive in space while remaining flexible enough to channel the cosmic forces he was learning to control. The prison world appeared on their sensors as a dark sphere orbited by geometric structures that hurt to look at directly. Quantum containment fields created aurora-like displays in the planet's atmosphere as the life force of 300 enslaved dragons was harvested to power the Nethys war machine. Remember, Vorthak warned as they prepared to enter the system. Once we begin this, there can be no retreat. The Nethys will hunt us across the universe if we succeed here. Marcus looked at the prison world growing larger in their view and thought about the enslaved beings suffering in quantum bondage below. He thought about his quiet life on Mars, about the safety of never taking risks, about the comfortable ignorance of never knowing that such evil existed. Then he thought about what his mother had taught him about being responsible for the knowledge you possessed. "Let's go free some dragons," he said. The Nethys prison world hung before them like a wound in space itself, its black surface crawling with geometric patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when Marcus tried to focus on them. The orbital extraction platforms glowed with the sickly light of harvested dragon essence, their crystalline arrays converting life force into the exotic energies that powered the Nethys Empire. Marcus felt his stomach clench as he perceived the true horror of what they faced. Through his enhanced senses, he could feel the pain of the enslaved dragons below. 300 ancient minds, trapped in quantum cages, their consciousness suppressed while their bodies were slowly drained of everything that made them who they were. "The containment grid extends through 7 dimensions," Vorthak explained, his mental voice tight with centuries of helpless rage. "Each prison field is keyed to dragon thought patterns. Any attempt to break free using traditional methods only strengthens the bonds. Marcus studied the alien architecture through the hybrid perception his training had granted him. Where the dragons saw an impregnable fortress, his human mind recognized patterns that reminded him of circuit boards and computer networks. The Nethys might be millions of years ahead of human technology, but they still thought in terms of systems and connections. It's like a computer program, he realized aloud. The containment fields aren't just physical barriers. They're running a continuous analysis of dragon consciousness, adapting in real time to prevent escape. But what if we fed them something they couldn't analyze? He reached out with his mind to touch the quantum threads that connected the 12 free dragons around him. Through their shared consciousness, he began to weave something new. A pattern of thought that was neither fully human nor fully dragon, but something unprecedented in the universe's long history. The effect was immediate and startling. The orbital platforms shuddered as their analyzing systems encountered data they couldn't process. Warning signals cascaded through the Nethys command structure as their perfect prison began to develop blind spots. Now, Marcus said, and the 12 dragons moved as one. They dropped from their hiding place behind a shattered moon, diving toward the prison world with a speed that bent space around their passage. Marcus rode in the space between Vorthak's claws, his symbiotic shell blazing with energies he was only beginning to understand, as he channeled his hybrid techniques into focused attacks on the containment grid. The Nethys' response was swift and brutal. Defense platforms emerged from dimensional pockets, their crystalline weapons firing beams of pure entropy that could unmake matter at the quantum level. But the dragons were no longer fighting like they had a million years ago. Marcus had taught them chaos theory and guerrilla tactics, showing them how to move in patterns that their enemies couldn't predict. Instead of the flowing, graceful combat that had served dragons for eons, they fought with harsh, discordant movements that made the Nethys targeting systems falter. They sang not harmony, but deliberate discord, their voices creating quantum interference patterns that disrupted the prison's power grid. Marcus felt the change ripple through the containment fields below as the first dragon broke free. A being who had been trapped for 3,000 years suddenly remembered what it was like to think freely, to move without restraint, to breathe the cosmic wind between stars. The freed dragon's roar of rage and joy echoed across all 7 dimensions as she rose from her quantum cage, her scales blazing with stellar fire that had been banked but never extinguished. She was ancient beyond human comprehension, her mind holding memories of the universe when it was young, but her gratitude as she joined the battle was as pure as a child's laughter. More breaking free, Vorthak reported as Marcus's disruptive techniques spread through the containment grid like a virus, turning the Nethys' own adaptability against them. The pattern holds. They cannot compensate for human unpredictability, but their success had not gone unnoticed. Through the quantum foam, Marcus felt something vast and malevolent, turning its attention toward their small rebellion. The Nethys Empire spanned 17 galaxies, commanded resources that dwarfed entire star systems, and had never tolerated threats to their dominion. The sky above the prison world tore open like fabric, revealing the angular silhouette of a Nethys war dreadnought. The ship was the size of a small moon, its hull covered in the same mind-bending geometric patterns that adorned the prison below. But where the planet's designs were meant to contain and harvest, the dreadnought's patterns were clearly designed for destruction on a cosmic scale. Entropy cannons, one of the freed dragons warned, her mental voice carrying the weight of personal experience. They will not hesitate to destroy this entire star system to stop us. Marcus felt the weight of impossible decisions settling on his shoulders. 300 dragons were still trapped below, their rescue barely begun. But the approaching dreadnought carried enough firepower to sterilize entire sectors of space, and more Nethys ships would be coming through the dimensional rift. Then he remembered something his father had told him years ago, during one of their weekend fishing trips to the Martian crystal lakes. Sometimes the smallest fish can bring down the biggest predator. Son, you just have to know where to bite. Vorthak, Marcus said, his voice carrying new authority as the hybrid consciousness settled fully into place. Take me inside that ship, The dragon's shock rippled through their mental connection. That would be suicide, young bridge soul. The dreadnought's interior is a maze of entropy fields and quantum traps, designed to destroy any intruder. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since this adventure began, he felt truly confident. Designed to destroy dragons and Nethi's operatives, yes. But I'm betting they never prepared for a human teenager with a really bad attitude. What followed was the most terrifying 30 minutes of Marcus's young life. Vorthak carried him through the vacuum toward the dreadnought, dodging entropy beams and quantum mines, while Marcus reached out with his hybrid senses to map the ship's interior structure. The Nethys had indeed designed their vessel to be impregnable to any known form of attack. But they had never encountered human ingenuity armed with dragon power. Instead of trying to fight through the ship's defenses, Marcus found the maintenance tunnels and service conduits that the Nethys used to repair their systems. These passages were too small and mundane for traditional dragon magic to effect, but Marcus's human-scaled techniques slipped through them like water through cracks in stone. The ship's central control matrix was a crystalline sphere the size of a cathedral, its faceted surface pulsing with the harvested life force of 1,000,000 enslaved beings. Nethys officers moved around it with the fluid grace of creatures evolved in zero gravity, their elongated limbs and translucent skin marking them as descendants of beings who had given up planetary existence long ago. Marcus materialized in their midst like a nightmare they couldn't have imagined. A young human, wearing living dragon-scale armor, his eyes blazing with hybrid fire, as he reached toward their perfect control system with hands that could bend reality itself. The Nethys tried to stop him, their technology turning against this unprecedented threat. Energy fields that could contain dragon fire simply passed through Marcus's human-derived techniques. Quantum locks that had held for millions of years unraveled under his chaotic approach to universal forces. But it was what Marcus said as he placed his hands on the control matrix that would echo through Nethys history for generations to come. You want to harvest dragon fire? Let me show you what happens when you mix it with human fury. The explosion could be seen from 7 star systems away. The dreadnought came apart not in a simple detonation, but in a cascade of quantum failures that unmade its very existence across multiple dimensions. The harvested life force stored in its matrices didn't dissipate. Instead, it flowed back to its sources like water finding its level, restoring power to dragons who had been drained nearly to death. On the prison world below, the remaining containment fields collapsed in a chain reaction that freed every enslaved dragon simultaneously. 300 ancient beings rose from their quantum cages, their roars of liberation creating harmonics that cracked the planet's crust and sent shockwaves rippling through local space-time. Marcus felt their joy and rage and desperate gratitude flowing through his consciousness as he floated in the wreckage of the destroyed dreadnought, his symbiotic armor keeping him alive in the chaos. But more than that, he felt their recognition of what had just changed forever. For the first time in 1,000,000 years, the dragons had won a decisive victory against their oppressors. More importantly, they now had a weapon the Nethys could never anticipate or defend against. The chaotic creativity of human consciousness merged with the ancient power of dragon wisdom. The rescued dragons gathered around Vorthak's group in a formation that spanned thousands of kilometers, their combined presence making local space shimmer with barely contained cosmic forces. Through his mental connection to the group mind, Marcus felt their discussion as they debated what to do next. Some wanted to flee immediately, to disappear into the deep current before more Nethys forces arrived. Others argued for striking while they had the advantage, attacking other prison worlds while the enemy was still reeling from their impossible defeat. But it was the oldest dragon among them, a being whose scales held the deep red of ancient stars, who spoke the words that would reshape the galaxy. We have run long enough. The bridge soul has shown us that victory is possible. Let us gather our scattered people and teach them what we have learned here. Let us build an alliance that can stand against the darkness. Marcus felt the weight of destiny settling around him like a cloak as the dragons began to sing. But this was not the mournful song of exile he had first heard on Mars. This was a battle hymn, a call to arms that would reach every corner of the universe where dragons still lived in bondage. The Nethys Empire had ruled through fear for millions of years, secure in their conviction that no force in the cosmos could challenge their dominion. They had reduced proud dragon lords to living batteries, harvested the life force of entire species, and spread their geometric order across galaxies, like a cancer. But they had never faced a 17-year-old human with a talent for hearing dragon songs and a complete disregard for impossible odds. As the assembled dragons prepared to spread across the universe, carrying news of their victory and the techniques Marcus had taught them, the young human found himself thinking about home. Mars seemed very far away now, separated not just by distance but by the magnitude of what he had become. He was no longer Marcus Chen, xenobiology student and ordinary teenager. He was the bridge soul, the first human to master dragon arts, the one who had shown an enslaved species how to break their chains. The dragons had given him a title that would echo through cosmic history: Flame Speaker, Dragon Friend, the one who burns through darkness. But as Vorthak carried him toward their next target, a Nethys forge world where enslaved dragons powered the creation of entropy weapons, Marcus smiled and remembered his mother's voice, telling him to always stand up for those who couldn't protect themselves. Some lessons, it seemed, were universal.